welcome to another episode of Ibexa Tech Talks. This time we'll be talking about frameworks, but instead of the usual suspect, which is the Symfony framework that Ibexa DXP is built on, we'll take a look at another full-stack framework. This is called RedwoodJS, and it's a full-stack framework that's similar to the Symfony framework, except obviously it's a different technology stack, so it uses JavaScript and other components from that ecosystem. So let's take a quick look at how these individual components would map to their Symfony equivalents. So React is obviously the view layer that's used. So it's roughly equivalent to Twig in this space compared to what we would use for templating in Symfony by default. But React obviously is quite a bit different from that. And it's good for building user interfaces and other interactive applications, but it can also be used for standard views and so on. Another technology that's familiar to many people out there is GraphQL. So GraphQL is kind of the API standard that many different applications use, and RedwoodJS uses that by default to communicate between the front end and the back end. So RedwoodJS, as we'll find out soon, does include both the head and the API. So in that sense, it's a full stack framework, since it also includes everything, including a native data storage, which takes us to the next point, which is Prisma. So Prisma is a project that abstracts data storage. So it's technically pretty much equal to what we would have the Doctrine ORM in the Symfony world. So Prisma is more or less similar. So you create, configure a data model, and then Prisma maps it into the SQL backend. So you can use a number of different SQL backends. By default, it uses SQLite, which is simple to run because it's just a single file. And then the Prisma backend talks to using GraphQL to the React front end. So this is technically what we have for the basic things. Then in the backend, you can also use TypeScript if you want. So it's a little bit loosely typed JavaScript option. Then you have Jest for testing. So this would be roughly similar, I guess, to something like PHP Unit. So it comes integrated with that. And also it comes with Storybooks, which is more of kind of user interface building framework, if I were to say that. But that's something which we can save for another day. So this framework has been around since a few years now, and it reached 1.0 earlier this year in 2022. I think it was maybe early April, probably. And it's been used by a number of frameworks, a number of startups, which are also listed here. And if you would kind of think about this one compared to something like custom built backend and front end, it's similar in that sense that, like the Symfony framework, that it brings opinions into the table, and it brings that conventions and how you should do authentication and that. So it's gives you guidelines on how you should work, but it doesn't necessarily give you the freedom if you want to build everything like you like it to. So it's similar. Again, it's a framework. As said, then regarding the documentation, both Symfony and RedwoodJS have pretty good documentation. Obviously, the Symfony documentation is one of the best I know, but also for the RedwoodJS, since it builds on other common technologies like React and Prisma. There's many familiar things here, and you can kind of read up on how the GraphQL works here. There's plenty of good examples of documentation here. For example, if we take a look at something for Symfony, you have quite good documentation with some samples, and here you have the same kind of things for RedwoodJS. So again, as a framework itself, these would primarily be used for custom projects or maybe implementations. So similar to what you would or could build with a framework like Symfony, obviously, or then Ruby on Rails, Spring Boot, and other similar options, Django for Python, and so on. So RedwoodJS is one option in this world if you're into the JavaScript part. And as said, the GraphQL part is very central in the Redwood out of the box. So it uses another common library, which is Apollo, for communication between the backend and the front end. So that's something which is good to know. Or good to know in that sense that you can also leverage quite a bit of other examples from the internet using Apollo and so on. Then regarding GraphQL also, then by default, when you launch the application, Redwood demo application in this case, you also always get by default one server running the API and one server running the front end. So these are clearly separated, and when we go forward to see how you could integrate Ibexa DXP with RedwoodJS, you can actually see that you can also use a completely different backend. But as said, by default, you get this GraphQL API and with the standard search as well. And then you can also use third-party APIs. So you could integrate the REST API from Ibexa DXP, for example, to power parts of your custom application to provide information for e-commerce or something like that in your in your RedwoodJS application. This is quite a bit, there's a bit of boilerplate, so it doesn't do kind of GraphQL schema stitching as elegantly as I think some of the other ones do. So I think like Gatsby is more elegant in the sense that it merges different APIs quite well. And yeah, in our example, we'll be using also later then our custom backend using Ibexa DXP instead of the default one. But yeah, if we go back quickly to here, and we'll take a look at these basic things for the project that we have. So in here, this is the Redwood application. I have it running here in the terminal. It's pretty much, if you go to redwoodjs.com and see the tutorial, it's more or less that. And then if we open the wait a minute, sorry, this was 8910. You can see this is what we get. So this one is fetching items from the Prisma backend, and then it just loops them using React. So that's quite straightforward in a demo environment at least. Then in the backend, you can see here you have the API directory. So everything for your API that you have, your local API running from the same project, is here. So here you have things like migrations for the similar to Doctrine migrations. So for the ORM to define the schema, you have these here. Then you have your schema definition in a file. So in this case, we just have a single post file, post type. So then this one is being generated and made available through the GraphQL API. Then we have other things you can do, GraphQL definitions, and you can write your own libraries and a bunch of things here to make your API a bit more sophisticated than just fetching from here. As I said, this is the area where you could integrate also, for example, the REST API to be exposed through this built-in API. I mean the REST API from Ibexa DXP. Then the front end is also quite familiar if you worked with any React projects. So we have the web directory, then we have the public directory, which is the document root where you have your public files, images, and such things. Then we've got the source directory. In the source directory we have components. In this case these are components for the React front end. We have a couple of examples here. Then you can also have the larger layout file here. This is just an example. So the templating itself is kind of well laid out and works really nicely, I think, if you are familiar with React especially. Then here what you can also see is a bunch of things regarding post. So it also, the framework has a number of scaffolding and code generation tools. So similar to the Symfony command line, you could do a generation of some APIs for editing content, for example, in Symfony, and it's the same thing here. So there's a bunch of code for the CRUD operations for what we have here. These are individual ones. Then if I open this one, sorry, and posts, so this is a generated interface for the CRUD operations, so you can edit and add new ones, edit like this, and so on. And then obviously you can also do debugging based on the GraphQL API. So this one now fetches it here. So this kind of is the backend integration. And again, unlike with Symfony, that the things go through internally on the server. In this case, the API calls are done over HTTP. So you can also work with a remote API, or alternatively a completely different backend if you don't want to use the backend feature at all. In addition, obviously, you have other staple things like the routing for these. So you can generate new pages. Here we have some page, and then you have a link. So you have some options similar to what we have in let's see if we find this source, and then pages, and the home page is here. So in this case the routing is managed by the framework, very similarly to what if you would be working with the Symfony framework. Good. Then let's take a quick look at how kind of the data loading works. So obviously what you do need to have set up is the ORM and data types and so on, that you can also use kind of generation tools to do updates. And then you can also find a couple of configurations here regarding the schema that is being used. And then these can then be used from within the framework in a concept called cells in this case. So the cell is technically, let's see how they define it. Let's see, cells. We want to see if something. Cells provide a simpler and more declarative approach to data fetching. So instead of you working with creating an HTTP request manually, but you can read up on the cells and the concept there. So anyway, a cell is technically a component which also includes the query for data. So this is the GraphQL query that you execute, and in this case it executes the articles query, and here we have the default state. So when it's loading, it's displaying this one and so on, and then this is the template that loops these items here. So quite standard again. Well, if I load this, you can see that there's some delay, but when we execute this one, it blinks because it's loaded through the API. So it doesn't do server-side rendering, I think, at all. I'm not sure. Maybe there's an option for that, but by default, at least in the dev mode, this is how it works. So that's enough for that. Again, I'll make this project available. It's very simple, but you can have it for yourself as well. Take a look how it works, and again, you can refer to the Redwood documentation for more information. Good. Then we have this one, which technically is the cell, which returns a rendered list of articles from the GraphQL database, or the GraphQL API from the local database, and then we include it on our main page template here, article cells, and then we print it out here. And obviously here, again, if we want to make changes, something like hello, let's see if this fails. No, it fails. So yeah, of course, we could just then add links as well, and these kind of things. Pretty standard if you're used to it. The nice thing here, like with Symfony, is that the default methods are already installed when you install the base package. So that's, I think, one of the advantages of this one, again, together with the fact that you don't have to build a separate API. You can just use the same framework for everything. Obviously, then it becomes more monolithic rather than kind of decoupled, as maybe many do like to build their applications nowadays. But then, yeah, let's switch gears back to Ibexa DXP. So obviously, Ibexa DXP is our DXP product. You can also run it on the Ibexa DXP cloud from a cloud instance, and it's also exposed through the GraphQL API, which enables you to work with the content and products and other features within our DXP. Again, this is built using the Symfony framework, but you can use it with pretty much anything through the GraphQL API. So you can get the standard GraphQL details here, and you can also switch the backend of the RedwoodJS if you want to. So this means that the system will no longer use its built-in GraphQL layer, which provides the model from the local database. But if you like GraphQL and you like Redwood, but you want to use Ibexa DXP as your backend, which it's fine to use, I think, here's a quick look at how you could use this method. So instead of the RedwoodJS backend, we'll switch over to using our GraphQL API. And this is in the main configuration file, which is Redwood toml. And then I'll just switch over the API URL from the local option to our remote domain. So now all of the queries will be going through here. Then if I need to restart the application at this point, because it doesn't change that value dynamically. Most other values it does change dynamically, but the change of the API URL configuration it doesn't. So now I would expect to be greeted by an error because we don't actually have the backend, the local backend available at all. So what we can now do is take a look at another component that I've pre-built here. So we have not under API, we're not using anything underneath the API anymore. If we look at the home page, and then under components we have the articles cell, which use the local database, so this one won't work anymore. But I have this query that works from our Ibexa DXP background, so it fetches a single article and then outputs or gets the details here. So we can use this backend with Redwood for a headless implementation using Ibexa DXP and Redwood together. So yeah, here we have pretty much the same thing, except the backend is configured to be remote instead of the local integrated one. So then let's just head over back to home page. I call this one, well, I can just use, I guess, Ibexa articles cell. So this one, and now let's see if we get this information. So this one I'll just reload. So this is now being loaded through the API from here. So obviously you no longer have access to the default CRUD tools because you're not using the local database at all. All of your database calls, or not database call, but your API calls now go to the backend of our Ibexa DXP installation. Again, maybe you lose something with this, and maybe it might be more sensible to either build using Symfony framework or then integrating the queries you need from here, so that you have a query and then you want to integrate it to the native GraphQL API. Not sure, but I think it's still an interesting option in the market to have this kind of a full stack framework built in JavaScript that has everything out of the box for building applications where you have CRUDs and or store data, read data, and so on. And instead of using the PHP framework like Symfony, this uses JavaScript, and then the technology is a bit different, but also then saves you time in setting up instead of you rolling your own installation with GraphQL and Prisma. So obviously then you get advantages of the continuous development that the RedwoodJS is doing, RedwoodJS team is doing. So I think that wraps it up. I will give you the access to the code again, so you can have a quick look at this. But again, if you're interested in reading more, you should head over to the RedwoodJS website to learn more. But I think that's it for me. Thank you for your time. Bye.